I'm going to start off by introducing myself, but I wanted to thank Sierra Nevada Alliance for the opportunity. It's really awesome that they're focusing on not just doing conservation work, but focusing on trying to get the locals who are out here really focusing on that stuff. So we have a lot of exciting stuff lined up for you guys throughout the year. Introduction of myself. I was actually born in Mexico. I came here when I was 10 years old to move straight to South Lake Tahoe, which was amazing as a kid. But I grew up on a farm in Mexico, so for me it was always really easy to pick the food that I wanted. And I really did find myself as a kid a lot just going out into the fields and picking a lot of different fruits and veggies. And I think that's really what inspired me. When I moved to the US, the first two things I noticed is the fruit and the milk wasn't great. Yeah, that just stuck with me as a kid. Every time I went back to Mexico, the food and the fruit, the milks, everything was just so much better tasting and better for me. Um, I started actually exploring wildflowers before I really started foraging here. It's just they're everywhere and they're so beautiful. And eventually started reading some of them were edible. So really started with flowers. And then a friend took me morel hunting. That kind of set everything off there. Once I found out that there was mushrooms, I started moving into studying what was edible and really blew my mind. So you'll see a couple of a couple of the lists I have here of the things that I work with throughout the years and the ways that I work with them. Yeah, that's really it. I always want to mention the way I like to learn is one of the new styles that they're starting to introduce to youth as well. So it's called self-directed learning, and it's really based on your curiosities and your passions. So if you are curious and passionate about something, you're more than likely to actually have what you're learning stick. So hopefully I can inspire some curiosity and a little bit of passion here. So let me do a screen share and then we'll get up there. Where's my cam? There we go. Uh, okay. You guys see the presentation? Awesome. Okay. So we'll be talking mainly about crafting with wild plants and mushrooms. This is pretty introductory, so I just want to give you guys an idea of what's out there, what you can work with. And I also host classes out in the wild, so hopefully that you guys can join some of these classes and start getting a little bit more hands-on experience. And you'll hear about some of the events at the end there and some of the ways to sign up as well. So today I'll talk about biodiversity, coevolution, seasonal foods, and how the washu, the indigenous from Lake Tahoe, use them. Some mushroom medicine, and then also some of the native plants that you can use in your garden. There's a term called yardening that is starting to take off a little bit, and people are starting to bring in some of the wild foods into their homes. So for biodiversity, it's super important for biodiversity, which means that there's just a lot of plants, animals, mushrooms, and these things are all interacting with each other. The beginning of biodiversity really does start at mycelium, and the amount of carbon and just food sources that are actually being put into the ground. So, in order for there to be a lot of biodiversity, like bees, flies, and then more mammals, you really need there to be a lot of plants, a lot of trees, and all of these things work with each other. So, this is not just true for land, it's also true for water. So, the more life you have, the more you're going to see actual foods and all of these things working with each other. So, the importance of biodiversity at the end of the day is you really get not just more foods, but you start getting more culture. And you'll see how culture is really based on how much was in that land. So we call it land-based learning. And then from there, I want to go into coevolution, so how it actually all works with each other. One of the best examples, and this is how I learned about coevolution, was how the hummingbird and the fuchsia, actually evolved together. So over time, the fuchsia noticed that the hummingbird was the main thing getting its nectar. So over time, it made its flowers a lot longer so that the hummingbird could stick its beak in there, get the nectar, and then other animals wouldn't steal it, other animals that weren't doing as much work for it. So this is true not just for insects and animals, this is also true for humans. So for this one, I like to use the morel mushroom, the one that a lot of people love. The morel mushroom over time made itself edible to humans because it noticed that humans were able to spread its spores a lot further. So when we pick a mushroom, we don't only spread its spores by picking it, but we also spread them when we take them with us. So as we walk along, as we eat, as we used to go to the restroom in the forest, we would spread its spores. Over time, that disconnection of removing humans or removing, say, a certain plant from a forest really starts affecting it. And not just say for the hummingbird and the fuchsia, if you remove the fuchsia, but that's also going to affect whatever actually ate the hummingbird. There's a big reaction when you end up removing one thing. For the next one, I want to go into one of the coolest articles I think I've ever read, and I ran into this during COVID, which was incredible for me because I was able to use that plant, and I didn't have much symptoms during COVID. I ended up getting a headache for three of the times, and the fourth time I actually didn't even know I had it. The hospital tested me before surgery, and long behold, but I really do attribute a lot of it to this plant right here. Let's go into a little bit of what that article, and you see the reference at the bottom if you want to read the article at all. But the Washoe tribe during the Spanish flu, the 1918 pandemic, where a lot of people around the world died, the Washoe ended up having no recorded deaths, which doesn't mean they people didn't die, but they didn't have any recorded deaths at the time. And what they used was the biscuit root. So we have tons of different biscuit roots, but this is one of the ones that's here in South Tahoe, and the one that you see that's more prominent. If you like fallen leaf, it's everywhere around fallen leaf. And what they did was they just peeled, boiled, simmered the root and some of the plant, and they took the top of that boil of the top of the water because that's where all the concentrated oils and all that stuff was. I think that's a really cool reference to really learn that medicine doesn't have to be something we pull for the shelf, doesn't have to be something that a doctor actually gives you. If we learn a little bit more about land and have that connection, then we can know a lot of these medicines can come from nature. So we can go pick a plant, just make a tea out of it. And I always want to mention, so there's a saying, one man's poison is another man's medicine. So this isn't going to work for everybody, but it's always well worth the try. In Mexico, we actually natural medicine and conventional medicine is used together. So normally you either try one or the other first. A lot of the times it's going to be natural medicine first, then conventional. And if those two don't work for you, normally you get sent to a shaman, which really does tell you things manifest differently. So a lot of the times it's not something environmental affecting you. It could be something spiritual or something physical affecting you. But the Washu actually thrived because of their learning, their connection to land. So throughout history, they looked at land a lot different. So they looked at everything as a relative. Even rocks were relatives to them. And in order to have a relation with these relatives, you had to actually interact and really treat them as if they were, say, your grandparent or your mother. And this land-based treatment and healing, because they had such a deep connection, they also knew that these things would manifest not just from, like I said, environmental stuff, but it might have been something that was going on in your mind and your spirit or your lack of community. So a lot of people don't think about that. Um, we do have our phones nowadays, and our phones take up a lot of our time, and that's how we connect with people. But the lack of face-to-face interaction and really working with people has manifested a lot of what people are dealing with, like anxiety and depression. So we'll go into that a little bit more. I really like to mention how the indigenous didn't really have all these distractions around them, and they really didn't know how to heal themselves, whether it was just with a plant or it was sending you off to a healer. Okay, let's move on to the next part. So I wanted to give you guys a list of the seasonal foods that I work with. There's way more than this, but throughout the years, these have become my favorites, the ones that I really like to use. And I broke it up into, say, berries and fruits, edible greens, seeds and grains. Now, edible roots is one that excites me a lot because it's one that I had to kind of break the mindset of you should leave nature alone, right? Picking something feels a little bit different than if you're actually digging in the ground, but a lot of these roots that the indigenous dug up and also some of the first settlers that came here in order to survive dug up, they're really, really powerful and they provide a lot of nutrition. Hopefully, over time, if you do get into foraging a little bit, you'll eventually start to learn a little bit about the roots. Now, the easiest one, and I think most of us have seen it, is the onion. The red Sierra green onion is our little tiny onion that grows in the sandy soils everywhere. And it's such a great edible. You can actually transplant it really easily and use it at home as chives. So that's one of my favorite ways to introduce people to this stuff. And a lot of people don't know you can use pollens. So pine pollen and cattail pollen have become one of my favorites to use in smoothies or in breads. They not only add a little bit of flavoring, but they're incredibly nutrient dense. And nowadays, a lot of our foods, especially a lot of our food sold at the store, the nutrient density in that food is really, really low. So it ends up stealing from your body a little bit. And we can learn a little bit more about that. We'll go into the microbiome and all that stuff, how this affects us. But we really need to be mindful of a lot of the foods that we're eating are not providing the sustenance that we think they are. I'm going to go into the edible greens and berries a little bit. So a lot of people don't know how many wild berries we have here. And my two personal favorites have got to be elderberry and serviceberry. So serviceberry will be more of summertime berry. And that one tends to be prolific, like when we have these rains that we've gotten. And right now, if you walk out towards fallen leaf, you're going to see a big bush with white flowers. That's usually the serviceberry. So to me, it tastes in between like a blueberry and almonds. And it's just got this wonderful taste. I tend to make a lot of jams out of it, and use the jams for different things. But the elderberry, that's a fall fruit, and I always make a cough syrup off that one. I haven't gotten sick. I used to get sick every November when I was a kid until around 30 years old. And I do attribute not getting sick, not getting this flu or cold that we get to a lot of this stuff that I consume here. What else? Yeah, rose hips are incredible. So rose hips, I'll go into that a little bit more, but I use them in many different ways. So I use them in fermented honey. I use them to make sugar, so you can dry them up and grind up the actual skin, and you can make a powdered sugar. And you can also use them in teas. So one of the best ways to get the vitamin C from rose hips is through the teas there. And I also do a lot of rose petals. So rose petals are incredible. You can do them in oil. You can actually make a syrup out of them. So rose petal syrup with a little bit of butter on bread is absolutely incredible. It's quite the experience. And I will be doing a rose petal syrup class this year, as well as a pine cone syrup class. If you've never heard of pine cone syrup, you take the little green pine cones, and we take them off the lodgepole just because the lodgepole is so overgrown in most meadows. And we take the little green pine cones, we ferment them in sugar, and you want to ferment it for a year. That's when you're going to get the best taste out of it. And we'll be introducing that to some people this year as well. So we made 5 gallons last year, I believe. And then medicinal tea blends. So this is a cool list that I came up with a lot of the natives that we have here. And it really just gives you an idea of how versatile all these plants are. The hydrating tea is actually one of my favorites because I don't drink much water. So if I can get a little bit of flavor in my water, then that goes really far for me. The mineral rich one For me is very important in the springtime because a lot of us we eat a lot of fatty foods and we just tend to not bring in greens and fruits in the wintertime. So in order to really get that flush from your liver to get everything moving again, you want to use mineral rich plants. So that way it can replace everything that was stuck in there. Dandelion's actually one of my favorites to saute and eat. So that bitterness in dandelion is really going to stimulate your liver and help everything move along. Now, emotional support, these they provide the support because they're so calming. So it's not so much it's changing the chemistry in your brain. It's really just helping you bring that energy down a little bit so that you can get a little bit more calmness into your brain and you're not overthinking. So a lot of us tend to really ruminate inside our brain and that can manifest in many different ways. For me, it manifests in anxiety and a little bit of depression if it goes too far. And then that's for the next one. So calming and sleep aid. A lot of us don't really honor how much sleep has to do with our health. So if you can get a little bit of help from a tea or even there's some mushrooms that can help you sleep as well, that's going to go really, really far for you. Digestive aids, these are great. They're used throughout the world a lot still, and I don't hear about a lot of digestive aids here in the US. One cool one that I was gifted recently was a limoncello. So it's lemons in alcohol and you just take a tiny little bit. So you don't take a shot, you take a tiny little bit of it after dinner. It works a lot like these digestive aids here. So you can grow mint at your house and just eat a little bit of mint after. Make some dandelion root and leaf tea. Now mallow leaf is amazing. It's actually one of our invasives that tends to grow everywhere, and it's where the marshmallow was actually developed out of because it's so mucosal. So when you make a tea out of it, it actually almost turns into spit, but this coats our stomach so that all these irritants and a lot of the stuff that is not good for our stomach, they don't get to actually reach the cell wall. They don't get to reach the wall of your stomach. It is protected through the mucosal properties there. Now, fireweed leaves, which have quercetin, quercetin is actually really good for inflammation. And fireweed leaves can be used in many different ways. So the smaller little shoots are really good edible. So they can be used in salads. But I also love to ferment fireweed leaves after it flowers. And the fermented leaves end up tasting like peach and vanilla. And it's one of the traditional teas out of Russia. And yarrow is also an amazing plant. It's not just a good digestive, but it also is constricting for the blood. So for women, I'll go into this a little bit more with yarrow and mugwort. So for women, the constricting properties of this one can help you reduce blood flow, and mugwort can actually help you increase blood flow. So those are two things that you can use if you're having trouble there. Cold and flu. So you heard me talk about elderberry. This is the way I like to mix my elderberry, and I also make the syrup with ginger, cinnamon, and elderberry, which ends up tasting great. I've never had a kid say they didn't like it, so it goes pretty far. But the tea is going to be elderberry, mint, chamomile, and ginger, which also tastes great. I've also done fermented soda from that mix right there. So for some of you that are trying to get away from the sugary sodas, it's really, really easy to ferment some of this stuff and get the properties if you're not very into teas. And we'll be doing a soda class later on this year too. So hopefully you can join that if that interests you. Now, the next one, the urinary tract, I've had a lot of luck, or not luck, a lot of success with men on this one, especially men that like to drink a lot. So horsetail and Oregon grapefruit are great for that. Horsetail has a lot of silicates, so it ends up providing that coating as well, and it helps to not irritate that lining there. So horsetail is actually one of the most ancient plants. It was here before the dinosaurs, and it helps break down the silicates in soil where other plants can't quite use that soil there. So what it's doing is it's pulling the silicate out of the soil and putting more organic matter on top. So eventually other plants can come in and work with each other. And that goes back to coevolution and biodiversity, how all of these things are helping develop each other. And arthritis and rheumatism. So these are basically just achy joints at the end of the day. So a lot of us that end up dealing with inflammation and haven't tried to mitigate that, eventually your joints and a lot of stuff starts getting achy because you are just inflamed all the time. Stinging nettle, which Shannon, you were mentioning earlier, is incredible for arthritis and rheumatism, and you can use it in many different ways. So intaking it is going to help really well, but throughout the world, a lot of people use its stinging properties. So it's called stinging nettle because when you touch it, it ends up stinging you, and it feels a lot like sunburn. So I was actually introduced accidentally to the stinging nettle. I had one in my garden. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know what was making me have this stinging feeling for a long time until a friend introduced me. And from there, I really just started learning about its great properties. So stinging nettle, the little needles that they actually have in there are anti-inflammatory. So a lot of people, if you have rheumatism in your hands, you can go rub your hands on that plant. And over time, so it's not going to work immediately. Over time, it's going to help you get rid of all the inflammation in those joints. So if you have an achy knee, you can also rub it against your knee. But again, if you don't like the stinging, you can start using it as a tea. And I also like powdering it. So I use it as a matcha, a substitute for matcha, or just powdered in a tea. So I can get I'm not just getting the extract of it, I'm actually getting the plant as well. Now, California poppy is the closest to the poppy that we know throughout the world that's being used, and it has a really good calming effect. It actually has the same latex. So you can either do an extract from the seed pods to make a little bit more of a stronger sleepy. I'd say if you do an extract that way, tincture is always the best so that you can put the sap into alcohol. The sap is going to be really, really bitter and it's hard to consume. And wild lettuce also has the same property. So if you ever ripped off a leaf for wild lettuce or broken the stem, you see the sap come out right away. And these saps are incredible. They have anti-inflammatory properties, which make them anti-pain. So they're pain relieving at the end of the day. Okay, let's move on to the next part here. Awesome. So in the last 10 years, as I've really got into mushrooms, I started making a list. And last year, when I went through the list, I realized I had over 50 wild edible mushrooms that I have tried and worked with. Now, some of them are incredibly delicious, like the morel, the bolete. The puffballs actually, if you know how to work with it, it can be really good. It's a lot like tofu. But as you look at this list, you can really get an idea of how much diversity is out there and how much food we can actually work with. Pickled mushrooms, which has been my thing lately, is incredible. It goes well on everything. For me, introducing people to mushrooms because they tend to already have this mindset that not only may they be poisonous, but the texture is not great. Pickled mushrooms has gone far and beyond. I've had a lot of people that don't normally like mushrooms say that they love that stuff. So eventually, at the festival, we'll have a mushroom festival this year. You'll get to see those there. And hopefully, the longer idea behind this is having a forest to table restaurant, not just here in Tahoe, but all around. So I'll be teaching forest to table classes over at the Truckee Meadows College eventually. And I hope that's the inspiration for those kiddos because I don't have time to start a restaurant. But let me go over. So agaricus is actually just like the portobello we buy at the store, and we have a forest portobello. So that's going to be agaricus marroni. And that's also one of my favorite ways to try to introduce people now because if they can associate a food that they're already eating with the foods that are out in the wild, then it's going to be a lot easier for them to get that mental state out of the way, the mind that won't let them say eat a mushroom. It's worth saying that a lot of people that get sick off eating mushrooms, maybe their mind just wasn't there to actually let them process it, or also the microbiome. So our stomach microbiome, if it's not diversified, then you're going to have a really, really rough time trying to process these wild foods. So it's always worth introducing yourself with just a little bit. So if I am going to go pick onions, if I'm going to go pick a mushroom, I'm going to be really gentle and just introduce a little bit. So if I was introducing a friend, egg scramble might be a really good way. Add a little bit of mushroom, a little bit of onion, and really just let the egg, let everything else shine. Oysters are really good. Chicken of the woods. Flocularia, the yellow robe, is actually an incredible mushroom that most people think it looks like Amanita, so they tend to avoid it, but it's really easy to tell it apart, especially if you come take a class. But there's a lot of guides and a lot of stuff out there that can help you out with that. And then I will mention that Amanita complex if anybody's seeing that there and going, no, you don't eat those. There are definitely a lot of edible Amanitas, but there's also a lot of toxic Amanitas. And if you follow me at all on Facebook or in the mushroom group, you saw me put the post up for the Pantherina, the Aprica, and then the Hamata, which are actually poisoning dogs at the moment. So we need to be very careful with these Amanitas when it comes to our dogs and then some smaller kiddos because this mushroom is toxic enough to actually affect your liver and make it shut down. So for humans, it's not as toxic, but for dogs, it might take around 3 days if you don't catch it for their liver to shut down. So one of the things we really want to look out for is if your dog's acting differently, if he's drooling a lot, if he's acting kind of drunk, sleeping too much, just things that don't seem right to you. It's a really good chance to really check to see if your dog ingested a mushroom. And the quicker you can get them in, so if you can get them in the day they ingested it, they'll be fine. 2 to 3 days later, you'll be dealing with a pretty severe case there. We just had a poisoning about a week ago in the group. The dog's fine. They caught it the same day. So that dog ended up being fine. But 2 years ago, we had one death and one severe poisoning where that dog is still affected by what happened to him. So mushroom supplements, I think all of us have heard through the recent years about mushroom supplements, whether it be mycelium, whether it be the fruits, tinctures, powders, all of this stuff you can get at the store. And like I was recommending earlier, I think buying this stuff at the store before you actually go harvest it is a lot better because then you can see if it does work for you or if it doesn't work for you. My favorite one I would say is lion's mane. So lion's mane promotes neurogenesis, which for a lot of us at around 30 years old, because we just don't learn as much after 30 and we tend to get comfortable with the comforts of life, our nerve endings actually start dying off. So if we can get our nerve endings to stay alive, not only is it going to help us feel better, but it's also going to help us learn new things. So what lion's mane is doing is it's actually activating the end of your nerve and helping it grow a lot further. And it's also within your brain. So in our brain, if our nerve endings are stimulated, you can think of this as a path. So I'll make it a little easier. If we don't walk a path out in the forest, it might take a couple of years before that path is overgrown and not existent anymore. So if we don't walk these paths in our brain and build new paths, then eventually they're going to go away and they're going to be harder to access. The lion's mane really helps you have access to all of these paths in your brain. Now reishi, and we have a local reishi, so it's a good chance to show it to you guys. This is one of our local Oregon reishis. We have three different kinds here. This guy can be used just like the reishi that the Asian culture uses. But for me, again, it's well worth trying the one at the store first. And if you really find that this mushroom's working for you, then maybe going out to nature and seeing if nature will gift you one. Turkey tail. So turkey tail has a lot of cool studies. The way I personally use turkey tail is if I ever have to take any antibiotics, this is the first thing I'm going to take after I do that round of antibiotics. And it's what's known as a prebiotic. So all mushrooms are going to have good prebiotic qualities, but some of these woodconks, some of these harder mushrooms here that grow on trees, these are going to have a lot more prebiotic and the fibers that are going to diversify your microbiome. So the reason microbiome is so important is it's actually directly connected to your nervous system. So anytime that your gut is struggling, your mind's going to struggle a little bit too, and vice versa. Anytime you're struggling a little bit in your mind, then you're going to feel it in your gut. And cordyceps, it's one of the new like energy workout supplements that people are taking. I personally don't use cordyceps. I have a little bit too much energy, so I don't need anything else giving me more. But it is one of those things that's being used as opposed to, say, like these energy drinks or these really, really, I want to say horrible supplements that people are using in the gyms. So a lot of us are focused on what our body looks like as opposed to is my body healthy? And I think cordyceps is one of the things that's really going to switch that mindset a little bit. So it's not so much about what do I look like, is do I feel good? Okay, and I'm gonna finish this off with a few plants that you can actually use in your garden. So spring beauties, also known as miner's lettuce, for some of you that might have heard that one there. We have a few different kinds here. So this one that I have pictured is one that I pick a lot here in South Lake, and it tends to have red leaves on the bottom and this green on top. But it is incredible for you. It has tons of vitamin C, vitamin A, iron, and it is incredible in a salad. So I tend to pull about three little tops of this, chop it up a little bit, and just use olive oil and lemon. And I've also been using it on sandwiches a lot, so as a substitute to lettuce. And this guy will actually, I think, till around July when it gets a little bit drier, you'll see them everywhere. But you can find them year round, next to rivers or anywhere where there's water. And they tend to be pretty prolific. And the flavor on this one is it's a lot like lettuce, but almost with like a succulent little flavor mixed into it. Um, Through the classes, I've done like 10 outdoor classes this year. I don't think anybody has tried it and gone, yeah, that's not good. Most of the people ended up taking some home. So really good one to bring into your house. And all of these plants that I'm about to go through, you can actually buy the seeds online, or you can go collect seeds later on in the year, but you really have to be right on time for this stuff. So seed collecting is a craft in its own. If you collect it a week early or a week late, then it might not be viable. So buying it online with these people that have focused on that and know that the seeds are viable is always the best option to get you started. So mint family, I always get excited about mints because in the Mexican culture, we use mint a lot, especially when someone's not feeling well. We know that the stomach has a lot to do with when you're not feeling well, whatever it is. So mint is one of the first things that we turn to, mint and chamomile, just because it brings that energy down a little bit. But here in Tahoe, we have these are just my favorite ones. We actually have more mints here. The corn mint likes growing next to rivers, and so does the American mint. But American mint grows more next to the creeks as opposed to the rivers. Nettle leaf hyssop is I don't quite use it in teas as much. It's got a really light flavor, almost like licorice and mint together, but really, really light. And this one's my favorite to actually put in the garden for butterflies because the flowers are huge and it ends up attracting the swallowtail a lot. So it's also one of the plants that flowers around July and September, August, September, right when the butterflies don't really have much out there. So is a really good one to put in your garden if you want to invite some of those little guys in. Mountain coyote, man. This one's a little bit confusing. It ends up being more sagey mint flavor, and it actually grows more like a sage. This guy tends to be a lot higher up in elevation, not so much down at the basin here. But using these sagey, like really powerful plants, I always try to be very mindful. So when you have that flavor that's really potent, that means it has a lot of medicine and you don't need as much. So if I was comparing it to say the corn mint, I can use twice as much corn mint to make a tea as opposed to the coyote mint there. I'm going to keep it really light. If I was thinking about a cup of tea, for the corn mint, I can use a couple of spoonfuls of dried mint there. And for coyote mint, I would use just one little spoonful. And I honestly just like chewing on it. I hardly ever make a tea out of it, so I'll just take a little leaf and chew on that guy. Now we got purslane. So purslane, I really love this plant because in Mexico we use it in soups, we use it in salads, and we also just use to munch on it. It grows everywhere in the fields out there, and we know it as verdolagas. So I remember as a kid every year, because my grandpa had a farm and it was everywhere, me and my brothers would pick some and we would go out to the plaza and sell it to people. So a little bit of a start there too for some of these classes for me. But this one's incredible. So it's got you'll hear this a lot, the vitamin A, vitamin C. So for a lot of these green little plants that are spring plants, they're going to be pretty similar. And that has a lot to say about how nature has learned to provide for us because these are the things that nature knows we need in the springtime to help us get that flow again. Because we would have had so much meat, so much nuts, we really needed to get our body flowing again. Calcium, magnesium, potassium, and iron. So it's like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the foods we get at the store are not going to be very nutrient dense, which doesn't mean they don't have this stuff, but they don't have it at the quantity that these plants are going to have it. Again, I do want to mention you want to be incredibly mindful if you eat a lot of store-bought food to not go pick a bunch of purslane and just engorge yourself with it because you might get sick off that. Fiber, I think a lot of us are really missing fiber in our diets. So fiber is really going to help move everything out and help things not get stuck in your gut. If you're not consistently, if say if you're not going to the bathroom once, twice a day, maybe even three times, then you very possibly have some backups and you need to get a little bit more fiber into your system. So whether it be mushrooms, plants, and then you'll hear me talk about the lamb's quarter, which is an incredible fibrous plant. So when I introduce that one to people, they get a little, they don't like how fibrous the plant is. So I like to powder that one too. So purslane will also have aminos and protein. This one's for the vegetarians. So I think vegetarians tend to have a hard time trying to find substitutes for meat, but there are incredible plant substitutes and there are incredible mushroom substitutes for meat. So mushroom's actually one of the closest things to meat if you break it down genetically or yeah. So lamb's quarter, like I said, you're going to see a lot of the same properties for a lot of these plants. And the best way for me to embody their flavor is sometimes I mix them together, but for like a lamb's quarter or a stinging nettle, I try to just use it with itself and make, say, like a potato soup. So if I made a potato soup, I can add just some lamb's quarter in there and make a nice creamy potato soup, or I can also do some nettles. Now, for the lamb's quarter, this is also known as native spinach. You might have heard that a little bit. And this is so depending on where it's grown, it can have 10 times the nutrient and mineral density of a native spinach. And these guys like to grow anywhere that humans have disturbed. So the cool part about that is we've disturbed a lot of different soils throughout, not just Lake Tahoe, throughout the world there. And a lot of these plants that are growing in disturbed soils were the plants that our ancestors brought in order to feed themselves. So there is a native version of lamb's quarter and there's a non-native version, and they're both going to be great. You might even have it in your yard at the moment and don't quite know. We grow it at a friend's garden, and it's probably the plant that we use the most in the springtime. So I like to add it to salads. I like to cook it, so I'll saute it with even mushrooms, with just a few potatoes, or just by itself. But we also like to powder it because it has such a high nutrient density, mineral density, and it also has aminos and protein. This is a really good one to add to your shake if you're vegetarian. And then we got stinging nettle. So I'm a little bit obsessed with stinging nettle because of how many properties it has. And for me, it's not just a plant I can eat, it's also a bioaccumulator. So in the garden, it tends to grow really, really fast and it spreads really easily. If you're trying to get a little bit more organic matter in your garden, which is how things really can grow. So if there's no organic matter, there's no mycelium, there's no insects, there's no birds or mammals visiting. And this is one of the simplest ways that you can actually build that up. I'm talking back to biodiversity and coevolution. But again, you see the similar properties here. But this one is incredible because it has anti-inflammatory, and then one of my favorites is a antihistamine. I used to deal with allergies a lot as a kiddo, and it goes back to the way I ate, honestly. But this one really did show me the powers of how plants, how mushrooms, how nature can work for you. when I started using this one, it was very apparent to me that a lot of my allergies were coming from pollens out in the air, but it was also because I was so inflamed from the foods I was eating. And when I started eating this, I felt the cooling effect of it and how, yeah, my my cell walls weren't inflamed anymore. This one, if I am going to use as an antihistamine, I'm going to use it more of a tea, or I'm going to cook with it. So somebody put up a recipe in the group the other day for a pie. Gina Wood, she's actually another great guide here in South Lake Tahoe, and she's got a lot of classes coming up that you guys should check out. It's one of the longtime experts around here. But stinging nettle, if I am going to use it as a bioaccumulator as well, so I can either chop it down and just lay it into the ground once it's fully grown, or I can create a ferment out of it. So a bioferment is really a plant just dipped in water, and you put microbes in there. So you can either just add a little bit of dirt for microbes, or you can use milk, which has a lot of lactobacillus in there, or you can also make some lactobacillus out of rice water. And those are classes I'll be teaching. This is just me introducing you to that stuff. So my favorite, absolute favorite way to consume stinging nettle is pesto. So if you can go get your own pine nuts and then your own nettles, it actually is incredible. But for the most part, I actually just buy my pine nuts. I do want to get into the pinyon pine harvest, but I still haven't gotten a chance. So hopefully this is the year for that. But it's also great in soup. So a potato nettle soup is actually wonderful. Um, a lot of people might think that might not mix very well, so having a plant with potatoes, but this is an ancient soup. This is soup that they eat throughout the world, and it really is something that will remind you of that stuff that our ancestors used to have. The teas tend to taste a little bit more like seaweed, so that one does throw people a little off. I don't use it in teas as much. I use it in a matcha, so I mix it with milk, powdered nettles, and to me, it does taste like some of the cheaper matchas because some of you might know the more expensive stuff, but it really does taste like some of the cheaper matchas and is really good. Cooked greens. So I should have gotten over that earlier. We think stinging nettle, why would we eat it, right? Why would we consume it? So as soon as you cook it, um, the stinging properties actually go away. So all the little needles come off, and they basically just melt off at the end of the day. So you can either blanch it as well. I blanch mine for 30 seconds to a minute. So if I'm trying to use it not so cooked down and keep some of the mineral and nutrient properties, then I'll just blanch it for a little bit and use it that way. And that's the way I make the pesto. And then I think for a lot of my vegan friends, the plant protein, so the powder for this one is incredible. You can do the lamb's quarter and then the stinging nettles and really start to get not just these minerals and nutrients, but you're getting the proteins and aminos as well. And it's going to go a long way for you. And let's finish this up. So I got a little bit of a homework. So I know you guys thought you were coming to a class and you weren't going to get homework, but here we are. So your homework for this is and these are just suggestions too. At the end of the day, I would love it if you guys just went out there, identified a plant, try to see if it's edible, and really just start getting that curiosity going. Like, how many things out here are edible? How many things can I work with? Right? How many things can I bring into my garden, not just to invite biodiversity, but to actually be able to use for my health? Downloading iNaturalist is one of the easiest ways to start getting an idea of what you have out there. A lot of us know if we've used these AI apps, they're not the greatest at identifying things. And most of those apps are actually just comparing to pictures as opposed to iNaturalist. It's not just comparing to other pictures, but it's also using professionals to identify. And it's going through a deep, deep database that they've had for years of things that actually look like it and not just pictures from the internet. It's also one of the coolest citizen science. So if you don't know citizen science, every time you load a picture, somebody from a school, a professional, they start looking at it, and you never know when you actually found something that hasn't been seen for a long time, or something that a kid could use to study as well. One of my favorite things about adding pictures on there is you get a lot of students that end up using it for their presentations or just to study. Now, if you can find one plant, positively identify it, and then try to work with it. it doesn't necessarily have to be way out into the forest or on a hike. It could be in your yard. And I've been saying this in my classes a lot. I think it's great. Most of us forget because this is the city of South Lake Tahoe, but we forget that we're in a forest as soon as we walk out our door. Oh, that's a huge privilege and advantage of living here in South Lake or just in Tahoe in general. You don't have to go very far. And I find mushrooms right around my house. I find plenty of edible plants, but I'm also trying to be conscious to bring those towards my place. So one of the ideas behind bringing plants to your home is these insects, these animals, they don't have these corridors anymore. So in our cities, there's kind of these dead areas where they don't have the ability to get the food that they need. So if we can start bringing some of those plants, we can create corridors so that they can actually get to where they need to, especially if they're migrating, without having to really struggle. And like for the bears, they wouldn't have to get into our trash as much. So bears are avid foragers. They're gonna get what's available. And if they had more nature available, then that's what they would be eating. A lot of the logging is causing bears to lose their habitat, and a lot of that's making them come in, as well as the fires. Now you can consider making a tea, adding it to your salad, or actually cooking with your find. And I do want to mention again, you want to be very gentle. So whatever you're thinking about using, use a little bit of it, see how it affects you, right? And know that if it is affecting you in a little bit of a negative way, that might be your microbiome just really thrown off. So you want to introduce that stuff slowly, but be consistent about it. So if I eat morels once a year, I can probably bet that my stomach's not going to like them very much. But if I practice eating morels, so if I have dried morels, and then I eat them every spring, then it shouldn't be it shouldn't affect you in a negative way. Your microbiome will be diverse. And diversifying your microbiome is actually not just great for mushrooms or eating wild foods. It's really good for your brain, for your physical. And I like to say spiritual. I know not everybody's spiritual, but for the most part, whether you think you're spiritual or not, it does have a big effect on you if you're not embodying the energies at the end of the day. Everything is an energy. And so this last one's really not just an invitation to bring your friends out, but to start creating community out of this. It was a practice that I started doing 6 years ago. So inviting people not just out to my mushroom hunts, but inviting them to dinners where I would cook wild foods for them and really just inviting them to slow down out in nature a little bit more. The big movement with trying to open up nature for people is recreation, but I think recreation is just a little bit too high energy. There's too much going on, and it's hard for us to pay attention when we're recreating a lot. So for me, the new movement that I'm trying to start is called education before recreation, so that we know what this land means to us, so that we're able to really focus on what is going on out there, who is trying to mess with our nature, right? This is a subject I'm sure is going to come up in the questions in a little bit, and how can we mitigate anybody trying to take over nature and use it for their profit as opposed to for the communal profit. So hopefully let's say you find one plant, you find maybe a little mint or something, you make yourself a little tea, and hopefully that really just starts to take off for you and gives you an idea of how to work with nature. But at the end of it all, that you start connecting back to nature a little bit more, because our survival not very long ago and our whole culture, everything that we did depended on nature. And that's how we moved throughout the world. Well, I'm going to end this completely with one of my favorite mushrooms. So this is a fomitopsis. Some of you might have seen it out in the wild there. Fomitopsis was what helped us travel the world, especially during the Ice Age. So this mushroom helped us carry fire. We would cut it in half. There's a pith in here, and that pith stays lit. So we would light it on fire. We would curl it back up, put it in our pocket, and we could essentially carry this as a lighter out into nature. And like I said, especially during the ice age when most of these things were covered with ice. It was really important that we had fire, not just to stay warm and survive, but to cook our meats or cook other things that might have not been bioavailable unless we did that. And I think that's it. Hopefully you guys have some good questions and you had a little bit of inspiration from this stuff. And I do want to officially invite you to some of our outdoor events. So we do paid and free events. And these events are just to get you out into nature, get you a little bit more connected. And we love having kids at the events. So I think it's worth being said that kiddos don't get to experience much of the adult world. We think of them as separate than us, but we create this disconnection to where they don't see what our passions and what our curiosities are. So we almost become non-human to them. If they can see that we actually have passions, curiosities, and we actually have interests, then they're able to relate to us a little bit more. And before I just go off on a huge rabbit hole there, I'm going to finish it up for you guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Luis. I feel like I learned so much, and I really hope that our viewers do feel that way as well. I know I especially appreciated this idea of connection, not just to each other, but also to our plant world,
Mhm,
everything. It's all connected in mind, body, spirit. And using plants as a way to really be that connective force is just
mhm,
gorgeous. To you folks who are interested, I put in the chat a link to Luis's newsletter and also the document for signing up for some of his events. So definitely take a look at those. There's going to be some great offerings all spring, summer, fall. So stay in touch with us. And as far as questions go, we did have a few great ones come through the chat. The first one is from Lisa, and she was wondering if we can eat plant pollen to help with our allergies.
Yes, and that's one you want to be very mindful of, right? I'm not gonna go collect a ton of pollen and then start shoving it down my mouth. It's funny, I had an interview one time while I was collecting pollen, and the lady was like, "I'm so allergic to that. Like, why would you be doing that?" And I think at the end of the day, if we did these practices when we were younger, then those pollens wouldn't affect us. Now they do, just because we're so removed from them. So if you are going to use pine pollen, cattail pollen, any kind of pollens to try to mitigate that, you have to be very gentle. The easiest way is to really get local honey. So a lot
Mm,
of the local honey is going to have traces of pollen, but you want to make sure it's raw honey. So if it's processed honey, it's going to have a lot of those good properties removed. A lot of people aren't very aware of that one. They think buying local honey is going to help me just because it's local honey, but you want to make sure it's the raw version of that local honey.
yeah, that's a great point. Definitely something to be mindful of when we're out, purchasing, even at like farmers markets and things like that this summer.
Yep.
Awesome. Um, Another one that came through is about bitter brush and if we could
Mhm.
use bitter brush medicinally or as an edible plant.
I honestly have never worked with that one, so I couldn't go too deep into it. Most of these plants that have that like really potent, say, properties, they're gonna
Mhm.
have some sort of medicinal ways. When I use something medicinal, it's because I've been dealing with something and I'm trying to figure out if it's gonna help or not. So that's why I mentioned earlier, a lot of these things aren't gonna work for people, but it's always worth giving it a try. And once you know it's not working for you, then you can move on. But yeah,
Yeah.
for me, a lot of store-bought stuff is just, I think because it's just so old and it's not actually from the area, it just doesn't work for me. And it could also be mental at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Is there a different way to recognize plants and what organs or what part of our bodies they can have an effect on?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, what,
There is, and for that one, I think learning land is a lot better. So in the European
Mhm,
culture, they use plants interchangeably. So if this plant grew, say, in Europe, and then a similar plant like it is growing here in South Lake, well, then they would use the medicinal qualities interchangeably, which is not
mhm,
so for the indigenous culture. So the same
mhm.
plant that grew here, if it grew down in Folsom, that tribe might actually have different uses for it. And that's what the land-based learning really is because there's different microbes, there's so much different things going on that that plant is not going to work for you the same somewhere else.
Awesome.
hmm
That's really
So
interesting.
yeah, if you do want to learn what it's for, I think especially what I practice is I try to read ethnobotany papers and how the indigenous used it here, right?
Okay.
And I really try not to dive too deep down the European culture and how they were using those medicines just because it's so widespread like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, to me, it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot more place-based.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Um, that is all we had in the chat. Does anybody else have
Mhm.
another question while we wrap up? Anyone want to throw it in there? We did have a lot of folks who were wondering about the slideshow, and recordings and whatnot.
Hmm.
So we're recording the webinar right now. We'll be posting it to the Sierra Nevada Alliance website. So you can always go back through and read it, or sorry, watch it.
Hmm.
And then Luis, would you be open to sharing your slides or whatever
Absolutely.
works?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah. All this stuff. For me, it's very important that not just it's not just shared, but that you have access to it
Mhm.
all the time. So, if you don't follow me on Facebook, Instagram, you're always more than welcome to text me like mushroom pictures, plant pictures. I think I
Mhm.
get like 20, what is this? Can I eat it? Pictures a day. So it's just worth having like a mentor, a teacher that can guide you gently through that. And I would love to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna put your newsletter and sign up information in the chat one more time for
Hmm.
those folks who are
Yeah.
interested. Definitely, definitely, check it out. We will be posting a few more events and things like that coming up on our Sierra Nevada Alliance website as well. So feel free to reach out to us there. We'll happily get you guys all in touch. Um, we do have Lisa was actually wondering if there were other recommendations for classes, books, things like that.
Yeah, I just saw that someone said braiding sweetgrass. For me,
Yeah.
tending the wild is like the Bible of California wild foods. And it's not just like, it's not talking about wild foods and what's available out there. It talks about how the indigenous viewed the forest as we view our garden boxes. So their mindset was if you took care of the land, if your land was being tended to all the time, then the land would provide for you.
Mm,
So that really speaks of like the cultural differences right there because we learned how to farm, we learned how to take these little plots and make them viable. And we can grow a lot of food in these little plots. But since the indigenous moved through the land a lot and knew the land very well, they were able to really just take care of the whole forest as opposed to just your little piece of land there. And
mm,
I think that's why to us it's a little confusing how they could have survived or how they could have gone here without houses or heat, stuff like that. It's really because they were so connected to the land. They knew where to move. They knew the things to use, like using
mm,
cedar bark to actually cover your house, which is not just incredibly insulating, it's antimicrobial, antifungal. So you're also
mm,
creating a home that's protecting you just by using this bark in nature. And it's
mm.
actually fire resistant too.
Right on. That's awesome.
Hmm.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll have to check out Tending the Wild. Thanks for the recommendation. I'll
Yeah.
I'll look into that for sure. I love it. Well, we are a little over on time. I mean, I know I could ask you about a billion questions, and I probably will.
Come to my
Um,
outdoor events.
yes, absolutely. Yes, coming to those outdoor events. Yeah. If anybody, like I said, if you all need to reach out to us, please do. We're happy to be a resource for you. Thank you so much for participating. This is a free webinar series, so we appreciate you being here. If you feel like donating, um, we also appreciate that. You can do that through the Sierra Nevada Alliance website, /donate. And other than that, I hope you all have such a wonderful day. And thank you so much, Luis. That was really
Thank
just
you.
phenomenal. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys for being here. I hope to see you out
Yeah,
in the woods there.
absolutely. Thank you. Have a good one.